follow it through, and suddenly, we got them to do it, importantly, while we watched, and then there were a few questions and mistakes and so on, so we live made those changes, and suddenly you've now got account managers who are doing the quotes. Save the business owner 15 hours per week, who was previously spending 3 hours per day doing sending quotes. 15 hours per week instantly. It's basically his weekend back per week from handing over one process. And by the way, it increased his conversion rate because now the account managers was responding to customers in an hour, where previously it had been taking 2 to 3 days to do that. But we've saved 15 hours per week through one process. And then, of course, you play that game again. You just say, okay, where else are you spending your time? And you repeat that over and over and over. And over 9 months, he removed himself day to day from the business. Right? Going from 60 hours a week stuck in the doing to 0 hours stuck in the doing, and he can choose where he spends his time and how to do it.
Hi, and welcome to the Sunday Lunch Project Manager podcast. This is your host, Nigel Creasy, and today I have Alexis Kingsbury, the business process guy, on the show. Hi, how you doing? Some of the alert among you will have noticed that we've had some hiccups with the show in the last few weeks. I've struggled with some of the audio that has come down. So I've been trying to fix that, and then this guy struggled really badly with that, and I put Ben's show out the other day just to fill the gap. I moved on to another episode to try and do that, and that one found out that one was also corrupted a bit, so I need to fix that as well. So I've now got this one with Alexis for today, and that's all fixed and all okay, so hopefully you will enjoy that. Bit of news, what have I been doing? Getting back into a bit of running from a personal health side of it. My thigh problem that I've had, and I've been doing the physio, and I'm back into running again now. I've got a 10k race this weekend coming up, actually, which I'm really looking forward to. First longish run for some time. Although I did a 5 miler the other day. So yeah, health and fitness and stuff is all good and great. We've been spending the weekend, as you can probably hear a bit of birds tweeting at some point. I'm stood out in the garden here in the UK on a semi-sunny morning with a little cool breeze, but otherwise nice. Been a gorgeous weekend. So as us Brits always do, we grab the opportunity to be out in the sunshine, because we don't see it that often, or it feels like it. And yes, that's where we are. The podcast's been going great guns with the interviewees. I've got loads of people coming forward, some fantastic guests I've interviewed, and got some more great ones in the hopper coming as well. I will be taking a break during July. I think I've got these two that are going out, and then another 2, and then I'll probably do some rerun type things, and then come back for all guns blazing in September. And so that'll be interesting. From a other stuff point of view, not been doing much with the writing. I've been busy with some changes at work and a few other things going on, so I've kind of managed my mental capacity a little bit by dropping things that I don't have as much time in as to get done. It is important. I think I have got the point where, with the struggles that I had a couple of years ago, I've learnt when actually the little flags are going up and I need to go, hang on, step back. What can we cut from? Let's make sure we're doing and keep the focus, so I don't get overloaded. It's good actually that when those situations appear, I am spotting it quite early on, which is great. But I do want to get back to it, and I think the second half of the year is going to be a little bit, fingers crossed, a little bit more stable for me, and therefore I'm going to try and crack on with one of possibly 3 of my books. The novel that I've always got chugging along in the background, I haven't done anything on that, but I kind of like to get that into its first draft, by the end of the year. But I also have two books, sort of project management based, that I've been threatening to write. One based around communication, improving communication within project management, and trying to projects, and seeing being able to identify and solve some of those difficulties when the projects feel a bit weird. And I've got a little, it's a bit unusual in the way that I'm planning to do it. I've just got to get myself together and do that one. The other one is the Sunday Lunch project, which has always been something that I've needed to do and get done. There's a vehicle next door driving past. It's always on my list. So I need to do that one as well. It's just a case of knuckling down and getting on with it, really, and just making the headspace and the time to do that. And that's the main thing. So I've got a couple of conversations going on where I've got a couple of speaking opportunities that I will be doing maybe in the summer or early autumn. And always available for anyone else if you want a speaker to talk about project management or about productivity within project management, or just general productivity. I'd be delighted to chat to people about those speaking opportunities, whether they be virtual or face to face. And I think that's all I've got to say today. And that's it, really. Enjoyed the conversation with Alexis. It's really good. As you know, productivity is something I'm keenly interested in, improving the way we do things and removing waste from our roles. And some of the suggestions that Alexis has got, and his company, the tooling that his company uses, certainly adopting the mindset of what he's talking about there is something that's, having talked to him, I'm thinking, how do I adopt it? How do I make it default for me to be ensuring, as someone leading a project, that I'm not down in the weeds doing the stuff that needs to be done, but also that when we have got stuff to be done, that everyone in the team can do it in the most efficient and effective way, rather than having to reinvent the wheel every time we come to do something, especially for tasks that aren't done regular. But have a listen and shout, let me know what you think. Thanks now, bye. Hi and welcome to the Sunday Lunch Project Manager podcast. I'm delighted today to welcome Alexis Kingsbury to the show. Alexis is an award-winning entrepreneur with over 10 years of experience, currently running 2 SaaS businesses, Air Manual and SpiderGap, with a remote and global team, and supports others as board members or consultant, including well-known companies like Sony PlayStation. In the last few years, Alexis has worked with hundreds of business leaders to help them save thousands of hours of their time each year and unlock their business growth. He's been sharing his findings and has had a huge impact on many businesses. For example, Alexis won the Most Valued Content Award in 2021 for his workshop at Dan Bradbury's Success Mastermind, a community of 60 plus small business owners, which led to over 300 business owners adopting tools and processes recommended. He's a husband and a dad of 2 and is passionate about balancing his work alongside his life, and makes sure his team does it too. He also enjoys craft beer, which we were just discussing, alcohol-free beer just a minute ago, whiskey, skiing, skateboarding, dancing, gaming, golfing, touch rugby and squash. Alexis, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here, Nigel. Thank you very much for having me here.
Brilliant to have you on. Finally, after my terrible intros that we've done, which end of the year, people can have a listen to them on the bloopers.
Look forward to it.
Yeah. I've every time I do. Most of the time, it's not in the actual show bits. It's usually in the bits after, when I'm doing the little preambles and post-ambles, that I get it wrong. But then, so I've saved them. But I thought, we've got one in the show now, so that's good.
I'll do my best to heckle at the end to increase the blooper reel then. For my bit, it's been hilarious.
I saw you enjoying every second of that. So Alexis, tell us more about you. A little bit of a thing there. Where are you? What's your background? How have you got into what you got into?
Yeah, so I suppose it'd be fair to sort of describe me as a serial entrepreneur, in that I have started, run, built, in some cases sold multiple businesses over my career, and which now goes over 2 decades of
Hmm.
entrepreneurship. I have had a background of well, I started pretty early, right? I was a early teenager when I started my first businesses,
Right.
but when I was trying to grow them, I just couldn't scale any of them beyond just me. It was I thought it'd be easy, honestly. I think back then I was a bit of a geek, and I would study the works of Richard Branson and so on. I thought, okay, yeah, I can do this. And I just couldn't make it work. Every time that things would go well, whether I was washing cars or sweeping drives or selling newsletters or building websites or whatever, any time it would go well, I would end up too busy and then wouldn't be able to grow it any further. And so
Yeah.
initially I thought that, the problem, sorry, got an alarm going off.
Yeah.
Initially, I thought the problem would be that um, that I'd got the wrong business model. That the very product or service that I was offering was not scalable, and so I thought that what I needed to do was change that. And so I would come up with business after business, and I kept on starting
Yeah.
another, 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 all with the aim of trying to create a business that would scale. And so when I still couldn't do that, I went to university and studied management science, learning how to build big businesses. Started other businesses whilst still studying at uni. I was selling headsets, building computers for local businesses. Again, like couldn't scale any of these. IT support I did for the students at the university. And so I thought, I'm clearly not cut out for any of this. So I became a management consultant, working out of London, working with large organizations like AstraZeneca and BP and Honda and so on.
Yeah.
And it was there that I really learned, like, how do they deliver at scale effectively? And I found that the answer was essentially people and processes. And I learned that if you have okay people and great processes, then actually the business still does really well. And those are the frustrating ones that you see where you're kind of like, how do they even exist? Like these
Yeah.
businesses that don't have really smart people in them, and yet somehow they seem to operate at scale and become massive blue chip companies and whatever. But then I also saw examples where you had really great people and not so good processes, and that can work as well. Like some of the organizations I've worked with where you're really impressed by the leadership and the people within it are smart people, but you kind of think like, how are they able to get things done consistently without things going wrong because they haven't got the processes? And what I found is that the answer is inconsistently is the first thing, but through flair, imagination, and sweat. They would work late, they'd do the evenings, the weekends, and so on. And often, consultancy is a bit like that. Is often every project is slightly different, and there's some
Yeah.
basic frameworks you use, but ultimately you're just applying creativity and effort and hours and so on often until you kind of work out the model and can deliver some value. So that was really interesting to me and a bit of a wake-up call because I realized, if I'm going to grow businesses that can scale without me, then I need to be able to build teams and build processes around what the business does, making it repeatable. And so that was really then when I left the sort of more corporate life to go and start my first consulting business, and then since then 2 software businesses and a few others, where I finally managed to make it all work. But even then, that wasn't easy. But I got to a point where I was able to scale, grew my business to 7 figures. I've now got a globally remote team with team members in 9 countries across 5 continents, and we get to help people doing amazing stuff, right? It's hilarious to me now that back then I couldn't see any way to not be doing everything in the business, and now my day to day is strategic. It's working on the business.
Yeah.
I'm not required day to day. I can spend 6 weeks on holiday and all that kind of stuff. But it took me a long time to work it out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that it's a number of rabbit holes that have popped up in this conversation for me, and it's kind of the I suppose I was going to ask you, the first one is, obviously your focus is on about this business process and helping organisations put those processes in place. And the question I initially thought and was, are you a bit like a mechanic or a doctor, where the apocryphal thing is that the mechanic's car's never working or the builder's house is falling down? And are you the same, or are you better at eating your own dog food, as the phrase goes?
Yeah, I think a really interesting question, because I'd say I do feel a bit like that. I am the sort of person that, well, I think, to put it a different way, I think a lot of people see me as being this very organized entrepreneur who's very into processes and structure and logic and so on. And whilst there's a part of that that's true, in the sense that I do think, I like to think logically, and over the years, I have learned that yes, structure actually gives you freedom. That isn't where I was naturally.
Yeah.
Naturally was me setting up businesses and not being able to scale them because I never put any structure in. I didn't. I didn't want it in my business. I liked the fact that everything was always different and that I could just go and be creative and build things. And so, to some extent, that's true in terms of my attitude to a lot of these things, about putting in the structures that have allowed me to grow the businesses in the way that we have, has been really a process of me addressing some of my biggest gaps. Delegation and managing people is something that has not been natural to me, and it's something that I've had to develop the processes of how do I do it and how do I make it easy to do it well, rather than having to rely on a set of natural skills that I did not possess. So I think certainly that's true, in that that didn't come naturally to me. That said, I definitely have good structure and processes in my businesses, because I know that I couldn't have grown the businesses
Yeah.
to where I've got to without them. Now, the fact that I have it there, interestingly, doesn't mean that I'm the custodian of all of it. I think, again, like, people often assume that, oh, well, Alexis is this process geek, and that's a part of that that's true. But as a result, they assume that I must have managed and updated and created all the processes in my business, which isn't accurate. I've only done that where I've had to do that to get things off my plate. My preference is massively that my team document processes and I get to just describe the result that I want, or highlight the outcome I don't want and ask them to improve the process to address that. And I think that's been a big lesson for me as leaders. If we were going to build successful teams, whether it's building a business, building a project team, whatever, you need to be willing to address those shortcomings, those gaps, rather than say, oh, well, I don't like X, I don't like numbers is a really common one. I don't like looking at the financials. It's like, don't decide, oh, so we won't have any. Like, instead focus on the outcome that you want from the numbers. Like, what I want is that my project runs to budget, or what I want is that we're profitable at the end of it. We can demonstrate a return on investment that the client or whoever that can see, and then get smart people who have those skills and preferences to then support you in achieving those outcomes. So I think that's so that's why I say it's kind of partially true.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's and I kind of wanted, there's a self-focusing thing there. Is one of the things I've got is obviously got the podcast, a few other little bits and bobs, and systemizing it at this my little thing is, there's just me. I tried to do some delegation to my girls, see if I could convince them to do some of the stuff, and then maybe do a bit of the social stuff, and then contribute pocket money towards that. I haven't managed to persuade them to do that yet. But it was then a case of me being able to systemize it, tell them this is how I do it. We talked about this, the little snippets I do from Headliner, the posts I'll do on LinkedIn or whatever, or using TikTok. I'm actually my little one's really into doing little CapCut videos, so I'm going to be getting her to do some stuff on there with that kind of thing, maybe. But but being able to put those processes in place and think about doing it, I have to do it for myself. I realised that one of the things in our conversation today, I read out a load of things before we kicked off, around how we're going to be doing this, and I used my brain to recount that most of the time. And then I forget to say, have you got a hard stop, and things like that.
Yeah.
Or those little things that and the way to systemize that process is I have a piece of paper, isn't it? I have a piece of paper that I pull out that's laminated. Every time I do a podcast interview, I put it there. And then when I'm talking to you beforehand, I remember to read off all those 5 things. But have I done that? No, I haven't. What's my job is to be organised. In the day job is to be organised and help other people organise themselves and work through the processes of a project. And it's I just find it quite difficult to. You've got organisational process, and then you've got your individual processes that we sometimes don't try to improve. And that was the topic of my writing, has been about we invest a lot of time in making sure that everyone else's resource in the organisation is managed effectively, and then forget about our own.
Yeah, and ultimately, because I think the concept of where you spend your time is fascinating to me, right? No, not you specifically, Nigel, although I do care. But how we as humans spend the time, because it's one of those few resources that we all have the same amount, and yet we all spend it differently based on our own values and so on, and also have our own views on what good usage is versus not, and the extent to which we can leverage it. So I think it's fascinating, like how we can do that. But as you say, for many people, like their jobs, if you're in project management or business management, whatever, like often people's jobs involve supporting the better usage of time of others, whether it's making them more efficient or whatever. Even if you're a specialist, if you're a designer at a marketing agency and so on, like to some extent what you're doing is, yes, you're delivering amazing designs, but to some extent you are an asset that helps other people spend less time doing it. Like you know, in theory, the internal business marketing team might have a go and iterate and so on, and hopefully eventually get to the outcome, or they can get you to spend a few hours and you can get to the outcome faster. So I think it's really interesting how we spend our time and how we invest. If we take the podcasting as an example, because I think that for all of us, there is an opportunity for us to look at how are we spending our time? How would we want to spend our time? What's the greater impact that we can have on ourselves, on our families, friends, colleagues, clients, wider world? And because if you can spend more time on things that have a greater impact, then everyone wins and you're happier and they're happier, and I found that impact ripples outwards. So it's one of those things where I think it's worthwhile looking at how we spend our time and improving it. And in fact, you mentioned something like podcasting, which often podcast hosts do a lot of the doing and some of the editing and repurposing. And in fact, we were working with a podcaster, Anna Moran. So her background was she was a radio DJ, now runs a really successful podcast called Britstralian, which gets like over 1,000 downloads per episode, which is a pretty big deal and milestone for a lot of podcasts to get to. And yet we're still doing all the work herself, including getting sponsorship deals and so on, because most of it, like, she gets a lot of income through sponsorship and advertising. But she was finding that she was limited in growing that part of what she does, despite the fact that she's clearly doing a really good job, because she was spending all of her time doing the editing and doing the repurposing and so on. And so if she wanted to have a greater impact, help more people, increase her income, she needed to let go of that. But in her case, she said, well, she's a radio DJ. She knows what the good show looks like and knows how it should be edited to do it. And she'd love to outsource that editing, but calculated it would probably take someone 2 to 3 days, a podcast editor, 2 to 3 days to edit each episode, which she worked out is going to be, easily into 4 figures of cost for her per episode, to get this kind of stuff done. And so she said, look, actually, I just can't swing to that at this point. So I'm going to have to wait. But it's wait for what? Because she's not able to grow the advertising and sponsorship income based on that current scenario. So what we did was I said, well, where are you spending most of the time? She said, it's editing the episode. So we said, right, let's document that process of how you're documenting the episode currently as a checklist, and we used our software product Air Manual. So we got this, step-by-step checklist done, and then we said, okay, already we've got it to a point where this could now be handed over to a VA. A virtual assistant could do this. You don't need a specialist podcast editor because you've detailed it out in enough detail that the expertise required is significantly lower, which means that now, rather than paying someone £200+ per hour, you can pay someone £20 plus per hour to kind of do this job. So already,
my daughter's pocket money. There you go.
Yeah, or your daughter's pocket money. So already, like, you've reduced the cost of the time taken by 10x, right? But then you can go further. So what we then said is, actually, where in this process, like currently it takes you 2 to 3 days, why? Where is it that takes the time? We identified a few steps, including one of the steps was in the edit. For her, it was very important to kind of remove bits and reorder it, and particularly to remove filler words like ums and ers. She wants it a very crisp episode and podcast. But of course, doing that takes a very long time. So we said, well, let's do a quick Google for how can I remove ums and ers from my podcast using AI, and a tool like Descript comes up where literally with a couple of clicks you can remove all those filler words. And she actually put that into her process, like, oh, okay, it's at this stage, upload it into Descript, then click, 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 and suddenly you've got many hours of work. Many hours, like 6 to 8 hours of the editing is suddenly reduced to a couple of minutes. So once you include the uploading and downloading and whatever, because she's using some AI to get that job done. And so suddenly you've got something that's now the overall task with a few other changes was now taking half the time, and because it was a 10th of the cost is now a 20th of the cost. So previously, let's say that it was going to be £2,000 of what she'd have to pay, and now she's doing it for 100, right? And so suddenly it becomes this thing that's like, oh, now I can do that. Now I can afford to outsource the editing of her podcast, which means that she can then spend time either promoting it or whatever. And so that's pretty amazing, because I think often when we think about stuff like this, and even in your own case, Nigel, the initial temptation, I've been in this situation so many times, the initial temptation is it'll just be quicker to do it myself, or I can't afford to outsource this yet, or no one else can do it quite as good as me, or that needs to be me. Like the number of times I still catch myself saying that, right? I'm in theory an expert in delegation and freeing up time and using processes to be able to build a structure that means that you can extract yourself, and yet I still catch myself with those self-limiting thoughts. And that's really the challenge, is spotting those and being able to say, no, there will be a way in which I can make this efficient enough that I can pass it to someone else. And as a result, increase the value of your time, work on more value-adding tasks, and deliver more impact.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's the ones that I had a section on delegation that I wrote about, and a lot of it, to be fair, a lot of it I picked up from Manager Tools podcast. It's an incredible
great
podcast.
Yeah.
And I know that they took a lot from Peter Drucker and people like that. You know what I mean? It's kind of so it's kind of like a lot of these things, but and quite often that whole point, as you're saying there about the why are you doing it question. It's so hard to ask because, and I've said it to team members of mine about the fact that, look, you the thing that I get is that leverage, is that the point that you as a leader of people have the ability to spend an hour that would influence 50 people and improve their job, save time, do a business case to get a new tool in for them to use that would save them 15 minutes every week. Or you could spend an hour, like I would be, I'll use a different word, messing around with a spreadsheet, because I like messing around with spreadsheets, because it's a nice place for me to be. It's warm and fuzzy. Yeah. And it feels really like I'm achieving something. But and it's hard to do that. And I think one of the things I found with that is, firstly, looking at yourself and going, really, have I got the time to talk to that person? And it depends. Sometimes you have, sometimes you haven't. It's if it's repeatable, yes. If it's a one-off, maybe not. But sometimes you need someone else, doesn't it, to actually point it out to you. And I'm not sure that we're we're not all that brilliant at being open or even challenging to say. For me to say to my manager, in some cases, I've said, "Why are you doing that?" I've kind of said that, which is quite a difficult conversation to have. But it's kind of, why are you doing that? Why don't you give it to one of your direct reports to do? You don't need to be doing that, do you? Yeah, and to my team, it's easier. It's right. Why are you doing that? Why don't you get them to do it? And then sometimes looking at mine, but I think it's that you've got your priorities.
Yeah.
Sometimes assessing every task, and I've got some guests I've had on the show, and I've been on their show for Code Break Marketing, Andy Rao and Joel Stone, fantastic guys, local to me, going from marketing into business consulting and all manner of things at the moment, and they talk about the £10 tasks, the £20 tasks, the £1,000 tasks, the £100,000 tasks, and about the fact that that whole point of, why am I really looking at every task that you're doing, as you say, how we analyse our time, and deciding whether it should be you, whether you'd like it to be you. And then Joel gives the example, he likes to wash his car. Yeah. He could, and Andy doesn't like to wash his car and pays someone to wash his car. And that's just two different scenarios. But then on other things, one of them will pay someone else to do something. Now, that's taken into the personal zone, but it's the same mindset in there. In those, if you get pleasure and if it's mindfulness and something out of that you get from doing something in the job, and actually it allows your brain in some ways to just disconnect from what's going on, do some sort of standard processing type thing that then allows that, it's kind of meditative in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So there's a few things there. So I'd say one of the points that I thought you made brilliantly is that often it's easier to see in other people's time where they should be delegating and letting go of tasks. And that is absolutely true. And it's why often it's easier for me and for my team when we're talking to people about, okay, how can we free up your time? How can we systemize parts of the business? It's easier for us to see it and therefore ask the challenging questions that lead to the breakthroughs, right? And I'll share an example in a bit around an example where we did that with a business leader. But like the point of why is it difficult for us to do it on ourselves, I think is complex and nuanced, but I'd say one of the big pieces is that because if you try and delegate, automate, whatever, everything that you're doing, that's A, overwhelming, and B, not desirable. And so I think that's often the problem, is that and also we might even wonder, but what am I going to spend my time doing instead? Like if we applied that lens to everything that we're doing, for example, me attending a podcast, or a few weeks ago speaking at an event with 500 people, does that need to be me? Or maybe that doesn't need to be me, and I can get someone else. I could hire a presenter, like I could hire a professional speaker who goes to speak to that event. But then it's like, what's a better activity is exactly as you say with the £10, £100, £1,000 task activity, is where you essentially say, what's the relative value and relative impact of the activities that I'm doing? And that's a better activity. And often what I will start with clients who just need to free up their time and don't even know where to start, is to say, well, list out, like, where are you spending your time? And now group those into low, medium, high value activities. And to your point around something like washing a car, that can have value. It's not necessarily financial value. It's why often I don't use £10, £100, £1,000. I use low, medium, high, because it's not all about the money. Like, as you say, washing the car can have other value. But on the flip side, if we say that it takes the guy 2 hours to wash his car and he does enjoy it, but he would prefer to spend that 2 hours on the golf course, or that 2 hours doing gardening, or that 2 hours with family members, rationalizing it as, oh, but I quite like washing the car, isn't great, because it's like, yes, but there's lots of things you quite like doing, whereas if we could free up your time from that, and I think that goes the same for work activity. I think we've got to be careful about saying, oh, but I quite like kicking around with the spreadsheet. It's like, yeah, me too, I quite like the sense of achievement on that, but also I really like talking on podcasts, and I really like coming up with new presentations or geeking out with people on what they're doing in their business that's working right now. It's like, I definitely prefer to spend my time there. And so I think that's the activity we really have to do, is a relative exercise. And the great thing is you can repeat this, you can repeat it every week, but certainly repeating it every few months is a useful activity to literally write down, where are you spending your time right now, and check you're happy with that mix. Because if there are likely to be low value and low impact activities that aren't even like things that you particularly enjoy, that could be automated, simplified, not done, or delegated to other people. And that's a shame, when there's so much more great stuff that we could be doing.
Yeah, it draws me to kind of, it made me think there, and a couple of years now, well, just around this sort of period, actually, a couple of years ago, I kind of went off sick with stress because of burnout. And since I've come back, since I've been well, I was off for 5 months. It was quite a scary time, and I've talked about it on the show before. And the thing that I've done better since is that I've been looking at things like this. There's a couple of things I want to do at the moment, for example, and there's some stuff going on at work, and there's some stuff going on at home, and it's kind of like, I want to do that now, but I'm not going to do it yet, because I need the mental energy to do that. And I know that the things going on, other things going on, until a certain point, I'm not going to have that mental energy. Or I may have the energy initially, but then there's a chance that it will build up on it. So I'm kind of learned to say no to things. And some of those things will be about looking at automating, looking at using... like I've got a load of, one of my great ideas, one of my many wonderful ideas was to transcribe all of the podcasts that I've done for the year, put them out in an ebook, boom, and do them one a year. I started doing that using Otter AI a little while back, and then the output that I got from that was, that needs loads of editing now. Oh crap. And then, but as you know, as we were saying before, as all this AI and all these different things have moved on.
Yeah.
That was 2019. I was looking at doing that. So the place we are now compared to my 2019 transcription, I think I used Amazon's as well, as leaps and bounds, isn't it? So, so I need to look at that again. But it's going to take some time to play around with looking around. I've put together a view of how to do it, pull it all in, create that through. So I think sometimes, with just from a personal point of view, is there is a danger that if we don't do that regular, am I spending my time doing the things that are of value to what I want at the moment, whether that, I used to have an icky, oh look here, because I had an ikigai thing up there, and whilst I think it's quite a lofty thing to get into that middle bit with all four of them, it's still assessing yourself in that kind of, where does it fit with you, each of those tasks in that kind of quadrant. Is it the one that's in the middle? Is it one of the ones that actually I don't care about? And doing that self-reflection can help with mental health and help with burnout, because then you'll sit there and go, actually, I do not like doing that.
No.
And if you say, can I automate it? I don't like reading. A whole chapter in my book is about Outlook rules and using Outlook. I mentioned it to you earlier. And for years, and again, it's manager tools, I've automated how I deal with emails, because the quality of the quality of data available to us to make a decision about an email is crap at best and misleading at worst. Because what you look at, there's nothing there that is a quality information to make decisions on. Now, obviously, Outlook's tools and the AI tools in there popping up going, you might want to read this before this meeting. Oh, and by the way, this, and you get some great stuff in there. But the first thing that I learned to do about 15 years ago was to move all of my copied emails into a separate folder called copied and not read them.
Yeah.
And for years, I've had probably 5 instances where I've gone, oh, God, I could have done with reading that. And that generally would have been where there was someone who I didn't put on my exclusion list who was more important or more regular or whatever that I needed to keep an eye on. But that's automation. That's process, isn't it? That's putting something in as an individual to do some of that prioritization and do some of that task handling. And I don't know how many people use it, but every time I talk to someone about using it, they go, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Oh, I never thought about using it that way. I don't... Meetings, for example, is another one. If I get a meeting, that goes in a separate folder for meetings because I don't need to deal with it now. I can look at it at the end of the day, check the meetings, accept all the meetings. So it gets rid of the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, and I think we can take that further even to say, well, actually, how do we stop that email even getting to
Yeah.
you? So, for example, for me, there was a time when I did all the finance stuff in my business, right? I would do all the bookkeeping, the paying of invoices, and the reconciliations and everything. And then I thought, well, actually, I would like to delegate this at some point. So even before I hired someone, one of the things I did was I set up an email inbox as if I have a finance department, right? You know, a finance at or whatever, and then set it up so that when an invoice needs paying or whatever, it has to go to that inbox. Now,
And you create a
initially,
filter.
that then got forwarded to me, but at least it's then got filtered and flagged and in a folder and whatever, fine. But of course, the brilliant thing is that as soon as I then delegated that, I then don't have that coming into my inbox. And the same goes for if someone wants to book me to speak at an event or for a podcast or something, they can email marketing@airmanual.co and go arrange all of that, and that's all managed there. And I've got lots of those sorts of examples so that I'm not having to manage that in my inbox. And I think that exactly as you say, those are all examples of processes and automation that ultimately allows you to free yourself up from activities that either aren't progressing and helping you achieve your goals, or are things that you don't enjoy and you achieve your other life goals. And I think that's really what all this kind of comes down to. And yet, so many people that we start working with are stuck. Like they are I was a business leader. I mentioned earlier, like a business leader of at a printing business where he was spending 60 hours a week working, which is not, frankly, sadly, is not that uncommon for people. A lot of people work crazy hours.
Especially business
And as a
owners.
result, he wasn't, spending time with family and so on. You talked about burnout. Like this is what causes burnout, right? I was talking to another client who wants to, was starting to work with us. And one of the things that she shared was that she'd been made ill essentially by stress and burnout, and so as a result wasn't able to work as many hours as she could anymore, and so really needed help like freeing up her time because she can't work that many hours. And so I said, oh, just like out of interest, because we've all got different amounts, like what's not many hours for you? Like what can you work? And she's like, about 10 a day. I'm like, wait, 10 a day is what you now can only work because you're sick and your health is declining. And I'm thinking, I'm working 7.5 hours a day, right?
Yeah.
And feeling healthy, and and you wonder why. And so I think a lot of people get stuck in that situation. But that business owner who's working 60-hour weeks, this printing business, he couldn't see even how to get out of that, right? He couldn't see how to start changing that. And so we played the same game that I talked about before. Where are you currently spending your time? We mapped out a load of areas. One of them was sending quotes to customers, so responding to customers requesting print quotes. And so we said, well, why is it like? He said, look, Alexis, I know I should delegate that. I know that I should delegate, but I just haven't found the time. And I figure it'd take me like 8 hours probably just to document it, and I've got to train the teams and all this sort of stuff. And I think often that's where we end up, right? We think, oh yeah, I'd love to free up my time, but I haven't got time to do that, which of course is the wrong way to think about it anyway. But I said, well, we've got 45 minutes left of this call. Let's see what we can do. And we documented the entire process for sending quotes at a high level, and then added in like the tricky bits and the screenshots and so on. And we did that in less than 30 minutes. And then we arranged a call with his account managers and got it handed over to them, and they used the interactive checklist and follow it through. And suddenly, we got them to do it, importantly, while we watched. And then there were a few questions and mistakes and so on. So we live made those changes. And suddenly you've now got account managers who are doing the quotes. Save the business owner 15 hours per week. He was previously spending 3 hours per day doing sending quotes. 15 hours per week instantly. It's basically his weekend back per week from handing over one process. And by the way, it increased his conversion rate because now the account managers was responding to customers in an hour, where previously it had been taking 2 to 3 days to do that. But we've saved 15 hours per week through one process. And then, of course, you play that game again. You just say, okay, where else are you spending your time? And you repeat that over and over and over. And over 9 months, he removed himself day to day from the business, right? Going from 60 hours a week stuck in the doing to 0 hours stuck in the doing, and he can choose where he spends his time and how to do it. And that's from a guy who, when we first started talking, couldn't even see where to start, and we know was making bad decisions on how he invested in time, and thought it would take 8 hours to document and so on. It's mind-blowing when you change this, because this stuff's life-changing. This is the difference between burning out, losing your business, losing your job, losing your partner, going down divorce, having poor, broken relationships with your kids, or losing your health, because you're not able to look after yourself. Arguably the most important things, almost the meaning of life, is at stake when we aren't looking after how we're spending our time. And it's terrifying to me when I see some examples, but absolutely inspiring to me in terms of what we get to do and help people to do when we have that kind of impact. Because, as I say, it's incredible what even little changes can make to people's lives. So yeah, it is hard, and it is hard to see it on in yourself and in your own activity, but it is an absolutely crucial thing to do, particularly if you're hurting right now. If you're listening to this and feeling like, yeah, I feel crazy busy, I'm currently listening to this whilst multitasking on something else I don't want to do and whatever, and thinking, yeah, I'd love to not be working crazy hours and feeling rubbish and not maintaining those relationships. There is a way out. Don't think there isn't. That you can absolutely get to a point where you're doing the stuff that you love and spending time on what matters most.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that first part of that conversation I had with Alexis, and come back next week and you listen a bit more about how you can improve yours or your team's productivity. Speak soon and look after yourself. Bye. So this is my final wrap up. Every week you're going to hear this, you're going to get bored of it, but you can always click next podcast if so. If you have enjoyed it, if you listen to this podcast to the end of this show and you think that was great, I'd love to be able to help Nigel out. There are loads of ways you can do it. The first and obvious way is to share the podcast, send it out to people. If you know colleagues and friends who'd benefit from it, you think they'd enjoy it, just send them the link. Grab one of the links or send them to www.nigelcreaser.com/podcasts. That's www.nigelcreaser.com/podcasts, and that will push them over to a Linktree link, and it's got all of the different ways they can consume the podcast. If you are feeling generous and have a big bag of cash, you could grab a copy of one of my books. Obviously, they're available in all the usual places, in print and digital. Again, jump on the website, www.nigelcreaser.com/shop, and that will give you a list of all the different ways that you can contribute and grab copies of the book. Also got links to all my guests' books on there as well, where I get a little bit of a kickback from them. If you are of a sporting mind, I have a number through doing some of my judo and running antics. I've managed to secure a few affiliate links and affiliates there as well. So in there, somewhere in the sponsors page, there's links to those as well. So clicking onto those and grabbing if you're looking to get super fit, then that would be fabulous as well, and I get a little kickback from those. I have a Patreon account. It's patreon.com/sundaylunchpm. So again, you can ping something in there, buy me a coffee or whatever. And finally, obviously the most important is coming back, listen again, because the more of you that come back, the more visibility I get, because there's more times that it's downloaded and all the SEO works and things like that. So yeah, that's it. So if you can help me out, I would be much appreciated. If you can't, don't worry about it. Thank you very much. Cheers now. Bye. Well, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Creaser, and it's goodbye from him, the Sunday Lunch PM. Goodbye.
Introduction. Hi, and welcome to Project Manager Productivity Hacks. Why write another book on productivity hacks? Are there not enough of them already? The trigger was my interview with Sarah M. Hoban for my podcast, the Sunday Lunch Project Manager Podcast. Plug. Find out more at www.nigelcreaser.com/Sarah M. Hoban. We talked about improving productivity for project managers, and during the conversation I recalled that a while ago I started a blog post in which I plan to share some ideas that I have used in my career to improve my productivity and get out of the office that little bit earlier. Over the years I have shared these with others, and almost every time I received a positive and enthusiastic response. Having rekindled the idea, I sat down and noted 11 hacks, tips, shortcuts, whatever you want to call them, that I have used over the years. Why 11? Well, it's one more than 10. This book goes up to 11. One for the Spinal Tap fans. I see productivity as remarkably similar to an exercise program. We all start off with good intentions, and some of the changes work great for us and others don't. Some changes stick and become part of our daily life, whereas others are just a real chore. Even the ones we found that work well for us and are straightforward to implement can, under certain circumstances, end up being dropped by us. Sometimes this happens consciously, and sometimes little by little over time. Whether building healthier habits or improving our productivity, it's not just a case of making the changes, and we are done. It takes repeated work. If you find them hard to implement, then they may not be for you in your current situation. If you start using them and end up letting them drift, then start again. Improving our productivity is something many of us strive to achieve, aiming for some kind of efficiency nirvana. Let me tell you, it ain't gonna happen. Perfection is a myth. Give yourself a break. It's a bit like yoga. You can't win at yoga. No matter how bendy you get, you can always be bendier. That's the same with personal productivity. You can't win at productivity. You can always be productivier.
Ed, is that a word?
I have not always been able to apply these hacks successfully, but that is not a reflection of the hacks themselves. It is more about my ability to stick with them even though I know they work. One last point, as with your fitness regime, trying to make loads of changes at once can spell disaster. I recommend that once you have a read of these hacks, choose one that excites you, maybe not excites but seems to resonate, and have a go at it. Once it is second nature to you, move on to the next one that spoke to you. If you find that the first one was not for you, then bin it. Choose another and try that one out, then rinse and repeat. So on with the hacks.